skin was broken and had become loathsome, and he sat upon a dunghill and scraped himself with a potsherd. We wonder at his patience, but we do not wonder at his impatience. He had fits of complaining, and failed in that very patience for which he was noted. Where God's saints are most glorious, there you will find their spots. The weaknesses of the saints lie near their strength. Elijah is the bravest of the brave, and flees from Jezebel. Moses is the meekest of the meek, and speaks in passion. Job is the most patient of men, and cries, "I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul." As part of his bitter complaint, he said, "Am I a sea, or a whale, that thou settest a watch over me?" He seemed to be watched and whipped, and then watched again. It seemed to him that God concentrated all his strength upon him in afflicting him. He was beaten black and blue, and whereas other culprits had 40 stripes save one, he had 50 stripes save none. He was spared no suffering, and he cries at last, "I am watched, and checked, as if I were a great sea needing always to be held in bounds, or a terrible sea monster wanting always a hook in its jaws. Lord, why dost thou harass me thus? I am such a poor, insignificant thing, that it seems out of thy usual way to be so rough upon one so feeble. The raging ocean, or the mighty Leviathan, may need such watching, but why dost thou spend it on me? Am I a sea, or a whale, that thou settest a watch over me?" I shall not moor myself to Job's sense of the words, but I shall spread my sail for a voyage further out to sea. This sort of talk may have been used by many a man who is now within hail of my voice, may have been used by sailors now before me. Let me point out the channel along which I shall steer in my discourse. We shall begin by saying that some men seem to be narrowly watched by God. They think that the Lord's eye is as much fixed on them as though they were great as a sea, or huge as a whale. My second point will be, that they do not like this watching. They complain about it, and wish they could get rid of it. Therefore they argue against it with God. Our third head is, that their argument is a bad one. They think they are very hardly done by. But the fact is, that all they complain of is in love. See, my messmates, the way I shall try to steer. But if the heavenly wind blows me out of my course, don't be surprised if I tack about, and go nobody knows where. I have, first, to say that some men seem to be specially tracked and watched by God. We hear of persons being shadowed by the police, and certain people feel as if they were shadowed by God. They are mysteriously tracked by the Great Spirit, and they know and feel it. Wherever they go, an eye is upon them, and they cannot hide from it. They are like prisoners under arrest. They can never go out of reach of the law. They cannot get away from God, do what they may. There are men who have been in this condition for years, and they know what I mean. All men are really surrounded by God. He is not far from every one of us. In him we live, and move, and have our being. Whither shall we flee from thy presence? To the heights above, or to the depths beneath? To oceans frozen into ice, or seas whereon the sun shines with burning heat? In vain we rise or dive to escape from God. Thou God sayest me, is as true in the watches of the night as in the blaze of day. God is with us, and we are always beneath his eye. Yet there are certain people to whom this is more clear than it is to others. Some are singularly aware of the presence of God. Certain of us never were without a sense of God. As children, we could not go to sleep till we said, "Our Father which art in heaven." As youths, we trembled if we heard God's holy name blasphemed. As men, engaged in the cares of life, we have seen the Lord's goodness, all along. We delight to see him in every flower that blooms, and to hear his voice in every wind that blows. It has made us happy to see God in his works. The fool hath said in his heart, "No God," but this folly we never cared for. We knew that God was good, even when we felt we had offended him. He has taught us from our youth, and manifested himself to us. Softly has the whisper fallen on our ear, God is near thee, God is with thee, God hath an ear to hear thee, God hath a heart to love thee, God hath a hand to help thee. I have known those who, even when they have sinned and gone against their consciences, have never at any time quite lost a sense of the nearness of God, even though its only fruit was fear, a fear which hath torment. With others God's watch is seen in a different way. They feel that they are watched by God, because their conscience never ceases to rebuke them. The voice of conscience is not pitched to the same key in all men, neither is it equally loud in all people. Conscience can be made like a muzzled dog, and then it cannot bite the thief of sin. Conscience can grow like a man with the cold, who has lost his voice. But it is not so with all men, even after years of sin. Some have a naturally tender conscience, and while living in sin they are never easy. They make merry all the day, for they count it one of the wisest things to drive dull care away, but dull care, like the chickens, comes home to roost at night. The sailor in company is jolly, but if he has to keep a lone watch beneath the silent stars, his heart begins to beat, and his conscience begins to call him to account for the follies of the day. He starts in his sleep. He dreams over his past sin and the judgment to come, for conscience will wake even when the rest of the man sleeps. You were wrong, says conscience, and his voice is very solemn. Even great sin in certain men has not prevented conscience speaking out honestly to them. Again and again the inward monitor cries, you were wrong, and you will suffer for it. We read that David's heart smote him. The heart deals us an ugly knock. When the blow is within us it tells. I am addressing some who, though they do not feel pleased about it, yet must know that there is a something within that will not let them sin cheaply. God has a bit in their mouths, and the bridle upon their jaws, and every now and then he gives a tug at it, and pulls them right up. They are not at home in sin. They have not yet got their sea legs upon the ocean of vice. They sing the songs of the devil with a quake and a shake, which shows that the music does not suit them. Thus God has set a watch upon them. They carry a detective in their bosoms. In some this watching has gone farther, for they are under solemn conviction of sin. They are convinced of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment to come. God's custom house officer has boarded them, and their smuggling is found out. I remember when I was in that state myself, a criminal who dared not deny his guilt, but dreaded punishment. I would not go back to that condition for 100 worlds. Then there was no rest for me. I was only a youth, but boyish sports lost their relish for me, because I knew that I was a sinner, and that God must punish sin. I awoke in the morning, and my first act for many a day was to read a chapter of the Bible, or a page of some arousing book, which kept my conscience still awake. The Holy Spirit put me in irons, and there I lay both day and night. My bed was at times a very weary place to me, because the eyes of God's anger seemed to be ever watching me. I knew I had offended God, and I had not yet found out the way of reconciliation by the blood of Jesus Christ. Now, it may be that I speak to some here, who have been to the ends of the earth, and they have said, well, when we get away where the Sabbath bell is never heard, we shall get rid of these fears, and take our swing in sin. They sailed off, and as soon as they reached port, they hurried to a place of vicious amusement, where no one knew them. But the dog of fear howled at their heels, and merriment seemed mockery to them. On the lone ocean the very stars pierced their hearts with their rays. At length their messmates began to notice it and call them old sober sides. "Jack, what ails you?" was the frequent question. And well it might be, for Jack was very heavy, and it is hard to be merry with a broken heart. In some such fashion as this the man feels that God has set a watch upon him, and that he has become like a sea which never rests, or a whale which roams the waste of water, and knows no home. God watched him, and though he would gladly have run the blockade, he could not find an hour in which his vessel was left alone. Certain men are not only plagued by conscience and dogged by fear, but the providence of God seems to have gone out against them. Just when the man had resolved to have a bout of drinking, he fell sick of a fever, and had to go to the hospital. He was going to a dance, but he became so weak that he had not a leg to stand upon. He was forced to toss to and fro on the bed, to quite another tune from that which pleases the ballroom. He had yellow fever, and was long in pulling round. God watched him, and put the skid on him just as he meant to have a breakneck run downhill. The man gets better, and he says to himself, "I will have a good time now." But then he is out of berth, and perhaps he cannot get a ship for months, and he is brought down to poverty. "Dear me," he says, "everything goes against me. I am a marked man." And so he is. Just when he thinks that he is going to have a fair wind, a tempest comes on and drives him out of his course, and he sees rocks ahead. After a while he thinks, "Now I am all right." Jack is himself again, and piping times have come. A storm hurries up. The ship goes down, and he loses all but the clothes he has on his back. He is in a wretched plight, a shipwrecked mariner, far from home. God seems to pursue him even as he did Jonah. He carries with him misfortune for others, and he might well cry, "Am I a sea, or a whale, that thou settest a watch over me?" Nothing prospers. His tacklings are loosed. He cannot well strengthen his mast. His ship leaks. His sails are rent. His yards are snapped, and he cannot make it out. Other people seem to get on, though they are worse than he is. Time was when he used to be lucky too, but now he has parted company with success, and carries the black flag of distress. He is driven to and fro by contrary winds. He makes no headway. He is a miserable man, and would wish that the whole thing would go to the bottom, only he dreads a place which has no bottom, from which there is no escape, if once you sink into it. The providence of God runs hard against him, and thus he sees himself to be a watched man. Yes, and God also watches over many in the way of admonition. Wherever they go, holy warnings follow them. They cannot escape from those who would be friends to their souls. They seem to be surrounded with a ring of prayers and sermons and holy talks. The boy said, "If I could get away from my mother, I should be free. I have been tied long enough to her apron strings. I am old enough to do as I like. If I can get away from my father's chidings and prayings, I shall have a fine time of it." So the boy ran away and went to sea, and when he got on board, a good old sailor tackled him, and talked to him about his soul, and then another pleaded with him. The boy said to himself, "Why, I have got out of the frying pan into the fire. I came here to be out of the way of religion, and here it is. I have known a sailor to go from port to port, and wherever he has landed there has been some gracious man or woman waiting to lead him to Christ. May it be often so. May the Bethel flag be found flying in all waters, till every runaway says, 'Why, I am watched wherever I go.' May it be as it was with our dear friends Fullerton and Smith on board the steamboat. Mr. Fullerton spoke to a rough man, and asked him if he was saved, and the man was angry, cross, vexed, and went to the other side of the vessel. There he complained to Mr. Smith, 'That man over there asked me if I was saved. He is a fool.